Yes, thank you very much. Actually, I wake up every morning and I wonder why I'm the only one doing this. So hopefully more people will join in and start studying this topic, which I just think is absolutely fascinating and covers such a long period of American history and all the states, not every single one of them, but so when people ask me about Irish greyhound racing, and also I was like, I don't know because I am so busy dealing with this. So my first point being that so little work has been done on this topic. There's not an academic study out there, a pure history of greyhound racing. There's been a number of dissertations on various aspects of, maybe the gambling public or this or that. But by and large, most of the work on animals and entertainment tends to be on, the circus and plenty on thoroughbred racing. So I just sort of put these up here. This is interesting postcard of Kings of the Turf, which I find very interesting. But by and large, you're going to find a lot more information on the thoroughbred history. And then here, there really is a little bits of elements of circus type of history, even within greyhound racing. They did use monkeys as jockeys for a little period of time in America in the late 20s and early 30s at various tracks. So there is that little bit of a kind of carnivalesque feel to some of it. And as you well know, when the greyhound runs, he's not often on the ground. So most of the books that are out there on greyhound racing are written by individuals who grew up in the industry, and they really do provide a valuable insight for us scholars. But of course, they're in the industry, that's their world. They haven't stepped out of it to analyze it. But there's a number of books that are out there. I call them industry insiders. So they usually grow up in the breeding industry and were involved in that way. Okay, so in order to understand greyhound racing, you have to know what coursing is. And some of you I've spoken with, and some of you do know what that is, but I'll just sort of briefly explain it. Coursing was practiced really early in England, and probably before. In particular, Queen Elizabeth I endorsed the activity, and she had rules constructed by the Duke of Norfolk. So this was something practiced by the aristocracy and then gradually trickled down to other parts of society. So basically, when you get to the 1870s and 1880s, it's become quite popular with more regular folks in England. Now, just here real quickly, I have on the left, that's actually a greyhound stall, and I thought that looked a lot like a thoroughbred horse. Well, not exactly, but it had the kind of delightful, artistic kind of look to it that you would expect in something kind of very high and exalted. So another paper, which I'm not doing now, would be this whole use of the sport of queens and the use of the female body to promote the sport, which continues well into American culture. But that's really kind of a side issue that I can't completely cover today. So for those who don't know what coursing is, here's a nice picture of an Irish courser slipping the hounds. And then on the right, we have kind of a image from about 1870 from England showing the various stages of coursing. But what you do need to know for today is that the point of coursing, when you slip the two greyhounds with a special slip collar, that's the slipper, they release the hounds and they chase the hare. But the point of the competition is not to kill the hare, but it's to show the agility, speed, and prowess of the greyhounds. So that's one of the important things to understand about coursing. Now, in the traditional sense, there was open coursing, and then there was also closed coursing. Now, open coursing was the kind of the purest form of coursing, where you would not have any fencing. You'd have a wide open type of space. Closed coursing was later criticized by, I guess, some snobs as being effeminate Cockney coursing and a mere caricature of the ancient and noble sport, travesty for purposes of gate money and gambling. But what comes to America, which is where we're headed, is mostly this closed coursing. Now in America, we have coursing events very popular, I'd say, right around 1886 and beyond, especially in the West, in California in particular as well. This picture is a little bit later. But there were, quite a few men, and mostly men, although women did attend and watch these events. involved in these coursing competitions where you would earn a cup and what have you. But I love this picture. This picture just kind of has they have a jaunty air, I think, in their attitude. But this is, I think, a little bit more in the 30s, 1930s. But the point that I want to make here is that from the very really beginning here, this sport is not really about the welfare of the dogs, and people aren't really talking about the welfare of the dogs. They're talking about rabbits. So these folks here living in the American West are not particularly sympathetic to the welfare of the rabbit. And for those of you familiar with the rabbit drives of the American West, you'll know that thousands and thousands and thousands of rabbits are butchered, literally beaten to death in order to get rid of, so many of these rabbits were pests to crops and to farmers. And so the whole kind of idea of a nice, cute, fluffy rabbit really doesn't exist in this particular environment. So for many years with greyhound racing, the thoughts were not, of course, with the welfare of the greyhound, but people were worried in humane societies about the welfare of the rabbit. But within the community of people who are coursing and living out west, rabbits are widely perceived as these pests. Now, the key difference between coursing and greyhound racing is this invention of the mechanical lure. Owen Patrick Smith in America is the one who is basically accorded this honor. Basically, sometime between 1910 and 1919, he's really working on developing the mechanical lure. It's an electric rabbit. Now, there were some uses of an electric rabbit in England beforehand, but by and large, he's responsible for promoting the sport in America and getting it, more widespread and known. Now, whether or not he was uncomfortable about the killing of the rabbit, word of mouth and greyhound history lore says, well, he was uncomfortable with the killing of the hare, but he might also have just wanted to profit on a new sport in a kind of an idea where you can bring everybody into one space to watch an event, which would be a greyhound race. Now, in the 1920s, this is when it really starts to pick up. Greyhound racing is not legal, although the actual racing of the hounds is legal, but the gambling is not legal. But what people are doing, of course, is gambling. So racing is basically run, quote unquote, on the fix, and people who don't like this are more concerned about public morals and corruption and that type of thing than they are concerned about the welfare of the dogs. Maybe a little bit about rabbits, but as you well know, once they're on the track, there aren't any rabbits. It's a mechanical lure. But this is one of the first tracks at all, and this is actually in Florida. This is the first Florida track, but eventually this one failed. But tracks are popping up all over the country in places you would never expect. Indiana, you have Illinois, you have Pennsylvania, pretty much you name it. There was greyhound tracks, not big ones, but they're all over the place. But people are objecting to them because of the moral offense of gambling that generally accompanied the sport. So the horse racing industry was not too excited about this. Yes, that's the right slide. They were not very happy about the competition. Now, one of the things that greyhound racing discovered was that if they run the races at night, they wouldn't be competing with the horse races in the afternoon. That's kind of a key thing, and we have Derby night here. But there was a Supreme Court case in Kentucky, all the way to the United States Supreme Court, that began when Owen Patrick Smith and his associates opened a track right across from the river from Cincinnati in Erlanger, Kentucky in 1925. But the language in the Supreme Court case in which the justices are trying to explain why it's okay to race a horse but not okay to race a dog is really interesting, which I guess I detail more in my book. But they try to kind of parse out what's the difference between these two animals. And again, New York, same thing happens. Horse racing industry not very happy about the greyhounds. So in this case, it happens a little bit later, 1936, 1937. I love this. Greyhound is a Trojan horse. So as you can see, this is what people were upset about. The whole idea that gambling, racketeering, political meddling, petty quarreling, what have you, all hidden in the Trojan horse of the greyhound. And once it's legalized, it's going to, destroy the people of New York. But the discourse, the language that was used to, vilify greyhound racing was all very class-based. About, the class of patrons at the dog tracks is not high. And there's a little bit of criticism about the sport based on the animals being starved, but by and large, it's not really a humane issue at that point. This is one of my favorite quotes. One of the judges who was sympathetic in 1936, basically saying, you know, why is it okay to bet on a horse but not on a greyhound? You know, what really is the difference? But you know, this view basically did not win out. And another similar type of comment, a local police chief in Massachusetts, and as an aside, Massachusetts is no longer one of the very strong states for greyhound racing. But one small town in Massachusetts, one police chief said he'd rather have smallpox in his town than see the bums and gangsters that would be drawn with the greyhound tracks. And there was a bit of an Al Capone connection with some of the tracks in Chicago. A lot of it is probably rumor and innuendo. You don't really know. There's no proof. There's no documentation. But everybody kind of thought that Al Capone was associated with the Hawthorne track in Chicago. So then we get to a period where there really is, believe it or not, and it's hard for people today to understand that there really was a period of mainstream acceptance of greyhound racing in America. The legalization of greyhound racing occurred in various states at various times, so every state has its own story. Florida 1931, Oregon 1933, Massachusetts 1935, Arizona 1939, and so on. But you really do have popular American culture in many ways embracing this sport. You have a lot of Hollywood stars, baseball stars, being pictured at the track and being very purposely associated with this culture. A very active, this is from the Saturday Evening Post. So it really does become mainstream. Nobody's really talking about the welfare of the greyhound at this point. There's still a little bit of hue and cry about the hares, but by and large, it's fairly accepted, mainstream acceptance. Now, as we all well know, animal protection comes in, and I'm not going to dwell too much on that, but my main point here is that at the beginning, the objections were based, once again, on the use of the live lure in training, obviously not on the track. So the whole point of how are the greyhounds treated, what kind of lives do they lead, that comes much later on. And that's kind of a key point there. Now, what happens is in the 80s and the 90s, everything starts to fall apart for the industry. Really damaging exposés are reaching the popular American public. And this is all about what happens to the greyhounds when they're done racing. There's no adoption movement. People, by and large, are told and are thought, you know, even the Humane Society of the United States said, these greyhounds do not make good pets. So people did not think of them as pets. They were euthanized in very, very large numbers. And that's kind of the worst and the ugliest that you're going to get. But that really happened in the 80s and the 90s. So that's when people started to realize, oh my God, what's happening to these animals? Now, as a quick aside, I don't really have time to get into this, but the whole subtext of social class to me is very interesting. This is printed in 1992, right after some real atrocities were unearthed in Chandler, literally unearthed in Chandler, Arizona, when there was basically a greyhound killing ground. So one kennelman basically just shot and discarded a bunch of greyhounds. It really outraged people, and this is a comment on that. But my thought has long been that the objections to greyhound racing have been a little bit disproportionate, given that there are, of course, abuses and problems in thoroughbred racing, but it seems that like the greyhounds get more attention. And this kind of shows this sort of low-class type of feel behind it. Of course, we have the cock and the greyhound. Real quickly, this is one of my favorite slides, and I just kind of have it as a point of entertainment, maybe more than anything, in that idea of animality, where you have switch. And I love the way this fellow running really does look like a greyhound. But I think this whole notion of greed, obviously, is what the artist is exploiting here. But quickly, what kills greyhound racing? It's not dead yet, but what is causing the industry to end? Evolving entertainment market. People want to go to football games. They want to see other things. So even aside from the humane movement, it's probably on its way out because of the evolving entertainment market. This whole idea of sport of queens becomes rather antiquated. This is a program cover from 1973. And then people really want to probably look at cheerleaders or something now. I don't know. And then last slide, the evolving gaming market has really, really hurt the greyhound racing industry, probably more than anything. Indian gaming, casinos, state lotteries. If you just look at the data, it's just a clear correlation. Anti-racing organizations, most namely Gray 2K USA, are piggybacking with these organizations to work with that in order to end the industry. So that is my final slide, and if this topic interests you, my book will come out hopefully in the spring, possibly in the fall of 2013. I wanted to point out it's not actually with a human animal studies series, it's with a Culture America series. So if you're looking for that, it's along with Elvis and the Ku Klux Klan and, you know, Wanted Women. So it's more of American cultural history. So thank you.